It's another day and another red flag for BioWare's upcoming Dragon Age, the Veilguard. The latest red flag is that they have removed player control over companions. That's right, they've removed the tactics part of the game from the game, which is a core game mechanic in the Dragon Age franchise. It is no longer there. Before we get to this, I'd like to ask you, please hit that subscribe button, hit that bell for notifications so you don't miss any of our future videos here at the Trent Report. Roll this up over at thatparkplace.com. And this comes to us from the game director, a man who pretends to be a woman named Corinne Bush. And I was actually, while I was doing research for this article, there are multiple articles on Games Radar from the same author. I think his name is Ali Jones or Ali Jones. And he refers to Bush by multiple different names. So who even knows what this guy's name really is? He seemingly can't even make up his own fake name or how to spell it. Well, sometimes he spells it without the, other times he's calling himself Coriana. It's who even knows what is going on with this guy. That's obviously a massive red flag in and of itself. But what he had to say about the removal of companions not being controlled by the player, I think is probably one of the biggest red flags we've seen, aside from obviously all of the disgusting, degenerate sexual orientation stuff that the game is trying to indoctrinate players into. So Bush said this to Edge magazine. On the experiential side, we wanted you to feel like you are Rook. So that's the explanation that he gives as to why the gameplay mechanic was removed, that you can no longer control the companions. He elaborated saying, you're in this world, you're really focused on your actions. We wanted the companions to feel like they, as fully realized characters, are in control of their own actions. They make their own decisions. You literally cannot make this stuff up. That is how he is justifying why they removed, I think, probably the most significant gameplay mechanic in the Dragon Age franchise. It's because we wanted to make the characters feel like they were in control of themselves, even though they're still NPCs, and now we're just programming them and players have no input. You can't just make this, you can't make this stuff up. Absolutely ridiculous reasoning here. Makes absolutely no sense. He did offer another explanation, claiming that Veilguard, quote, is a much higher actions per minute game. It is more technically demanding on the player. So when we tried allowing you full control of your companions as well, what we found is it wasn't actually adding to the experience. In fact, in some ways, it was detrimental, given the demanding nature of just controlling your own character. So it's because you're doing too much with your player character now that you wouldn't be able to control your team as well, because you're just doing too much stuff. Because they made it, they're turning it into an action game. It is now an action game rather than the tactics game, which everyone actually wanted more of and actually loved, and why you even have a franchise in the first place, because people actually liked Dragon Age Origins and the tactical gameplay that it provided. They are now removing that, and it is becoming an action game. And I think that is going to be a massive, massive mistake that will probably end up costing this franchise dearly and might eventually put the final nail in the coffin for BioWare. But anyways, Bush also added this, saying, I will admit that on paper, if you just read that you have no ability to control your companions, that might feel like something was taken away. But in our testing and validating with players, what we find is they're more engaged than ever. So you are taking it away. It is being taken away. You are admitting that you're taking it away, but you're trying to make up for it by saying that this action gameplay is more engaging than ever. We watched the 20-minute opening scene that they did, 10-minute, whatever it was. It did not look that engaging to me. It looked like a generic action RPG. It looked boring. It looked very boring. Let's be honest. It did not look more engaging. And that's what they showed us. So this idea that you're claiming that it's more engaging than ever when we've actually seen some of the combat looks like a giant gaslighting here. They shouldn't. Why do you even do this stuff? Like, why do you even reveal? I mean, at least they're being honest by revealing this stuff. But man, just pre-order sales probably going down, down, and down after this. While players won't have direct control of companions, Bush did note that there is some control as players can activate characters' abilities. He said this using Harding as an example. She's got her own behaviors, how she prioritizes targets, whether she gets up close and draws aggro or stays further back at range. But you'll be able to direct her in combat by activating her abilities from the wheel. Edge Magazine's Ali Jones claims that is because the Veilguard appears to be adopting combo-style combat, which I think he describes it similar to Genshin Impact, albeit without the character swapping that you have with Genshin Impact. All your team will be there. This is how Jones describes it. He says, those abilities are part of BioWare's big push towards combo-based combat. The developer offers an example. One companion uses a gravity well-style spell, another slows time, and then the player drops a big AoE nuke on top of your grouped slowed enemies. Bush added that, quote, this strategic layer to combat as a huddle, where you're figuring out how you want to handle the situation based on the information you have on the encounter and how you and your companions synergize together. Again, sounds very similar to Genshin Impact, where you hit someone with a water type attack and then you hit them with an ice type attack. They freeze, and then you bring in a fire player, a pyro player, hit them with fire, melt them, do massive amounts of damage. Sounds very similar to what they're trying to do here with the Veilguard. And again, it is a drastic shift from how this franchise has typically operated with the tactics style gameplay. And as I said, this is one of many red flags. I think the most obvious being that Bush has previously described himself as a trans woman and a queerosexual gendermancer in his bio on X, as noted by former World of Warcraft team lead Mark Kern. Furthermore, Bush also had the, quote, hashtag trans rights and hashtag Black Lives Matter in his tag as well. And those ideologies have made it into the game. We know this because Bush told us so in a developer story on BioWare's website. This is what he said. As a queer trans woman, I have a perspective on the games that not everyone has. Dragon Age has long been a place where LGBTQIA+ folks can see people like themselves represented respectfully. It's inherently very queer, and it's such a rare thing for marginalized communities to have representation where we feel proud and powerful in how we are depicted. It's so deeply meaningful for so many. I often get emotional when I think about what it would have meant for a younger version of myself to see someone like her in game, or see someone like me in a game, because you're a man. And as a hero, no less, I hope we can be a safe place for our queer players to know they are not alone, that they are brilliant and worthy, that they are not only welcome, but celebrated. Bush then said this, game directors are sometimes thought of as big personalities who are singularly responsible for the purity of their creative vision. But for me, it's really about being a steward for the vision that we as a team have collectively defined. I get a high level view of everything as it's coming together and can steer the project as it does, but ultimately it's about empowering people to work together, play with ideas, offer critiques, and make decisions, all to help create a cohesive experience for the player. So clearly all of the weirdo sexualization, gender stuff is coming from Bush, and he is putting it in the game. And there is a bunch of weirdo stuff in this game. We'll get to that in a little bit, because Bush also had this to say. In Dragon Age, you can be who you want to be, explore the possibilities and consequences of your choices, and build relationships that leave a lasting impression. Few games give players that kind of autonomy while also weaving such a rich narrative. I think it really speaks to why our players feel so invested in this world. However, this is not true. They are limiting what you can actually do in this game. They have removed blood magic as an option for the player character, which they're calling the Rook. And we'll explain why that is significant. But let's get into some of these sexualization, gender stuff, sexuality stuff, gender stuff, nonsense that is in the game. I'm not even going to talk about the game's character creator features all kinds of pronoun nonsense. It's all about like giving you this, you can do whatever you want to your character, rejecting male and female, just truly degenerate stuff here. And then we also have this from the game's creative director, John Epler. He actually told Game Rant there's a difference between player sexual and pansexual. All companions are canonically pansexual. Again, just absolutely degenerate. We heard something similar from Bush as well. IGN's Alex Stedman said this, or wrote this. Bush insists that they're all specifically pansexual, and that might come through in what you learn about their backstories. Bush then explained their past experiences are partners. They'll reference them and indeed who they'll become romantic with. For instance, we saw Harding. I might be playing a straight male character flirting with her, but I choose not to pursue a romance. She might get together with Tosh, which is a gender-confused Kunari. I think the Kunari is gender-confused, looks gender-confused by the character design. So my perception, my identity has no bearing on their identities. That comes through really strongly. It's not until the later parts of the game where you really commit to romance and it gets spicy. And again, the character designs here, definitely people have been calling them modern audience. You can see, I think that's the Tosh character there on the left, clearly gender confused character. And then you can see it's all kind of part of that DEI agenda too with the character designs. As I mentioned earlier, here's where the blood magic comes in. This is from the game's lead writer, Patrick Weeks. He said, blood magic is unlikely because we've shifted it from a power boost to really being the key to a lot of nasty stuff we aren't interested in having heroes do. The other stuff just needs the right game. And then he later added this, that hero who is not a complete a-hole, anti-hero is not a single trope. We give you different ways to play Rook and Veilguard, but stuff we've set up as corrupting red lyrium blood magic is mostly reserved for the villains this time for clear storytelling. Might be different in future games. So again, they are clearly trying to dictate morality in the game. You're not allowed to use blood magic, but you can do all kinds of sexual deviancy with all of these companions, right? So they are clearly promoting certain things that they want to have players interact with, and then obviously take that stuff and apply it to the real world. And there's other things they don't want you to do, like blood magic. And this is how propaganda works. And Brian Niemeyer talks about how this is something that Hollywood has perfected or had perfected, but they've kind of gotten away from over the past couple of years. And he wrote this in a blog post. He says, Hollywood learned through long trial and error to make the protagonist as likable and relatable to audiences as possible. The idea is to make audiences identify with the hero. He then added this, and the way it happened was by Hollywood churning out decades of movies wherein heroes whom audiences identified with achieved their goals by acting according to the death cult morals. So you can clearly see that's exactly what is going to be happening here in this game. Heroes are going to be acting according to the death cult's morals rather than any kind of actual true morals or ethics. They just won't. I mean, they're obviously allowing these players to engage in all kinds of sexual deviancy. I'm sure that there'll be all other kinds of issues as well. And that's because they want to have people engage in this stuff in a fantasy world. So then they break down their minds and then have them kind of bring it into the real world as well. And we see this. We see this societal decay happens all around us. And if you don't think the things that you consume don't affect your mind, I don't really know what to tell you, because clearly the things you consume, like the food that you eat, clearly can affect your body. So I think it's pretty safe to assume that things that you consume through your mind would also affect the way that you think. And I think that's pretty clear. If you're consuming a bunch of communist propaganda, you're probably going to start acting like a communist if that's the stuff that you're constantly reading. So you got to be careful on what you're actually playing, what you're actually doing. You got to have your guards up. And I don't think that people should be playing this game. Clearly, it's a shame that I have to say that, because I did actually enjoy Dragon Age Origins. I know there's some bad stuff in that game as well, but for the most part, it wasn't as degenerate as this. And if I'm being honest, I probably wouldn't be playing Dragon Age Origins again. I wouldn't be going back to it. Or if you do go back to it, you clearly avoid a lot of that sexual deviancy stuff because you do have the options to do that. Does not look to be the case here, because the companions are going to be engaging in sexual deviancy, whether or not you actually want to engage with that anyway. So I think that is a huge, huge problem, huge red flag. But I think the bigger red flag is kind of what we talked about at the beginning here. Maybe not the big red flag. I actually think the sexual deviancy stuff is probably the biggest red flag this game has. But the idea that they're just completely removing the most iconic gameplay from the game, gameplay mechanic from the game, it's massive, massive red flag, and probably might be a bigger red flag for some other people than the sexual deviancy. But the sexual deviancy obviously is the biggest for me. But what were they thinking by removing the tactics from this game? That's a reason why this Dragon Age Origins even got as popular as it did, because it had such an interesting and unique gameplay mechanic. It combined tactical settings in a kind of RPG setting and a unique setting and things like that. Had an interesting narrative, and it looks like they're just kind of throwing that all away and embracing kind of the action RPG. And it, as we saw with the gameplay, it just looks generic, and it looks, quite honestly, it looks boring. It looks boring. And even the narrative didn't look all that interesting either. But those are my thoughts on this. Let me know what you guys make of this. Let me know in the comments below.